The chopper blades disappeared above the canopy, swallowed by clouds and noise and distance, as Lieutenant Kara Voss hit the jungle floor with a thud, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth, her breath shallow, her instincts alert the mission, had started. But something felt off already. Too quiet. Too still, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. Her team fanned out weapons, drawn eyes scanning the dense green curtain that surrounded them. From every angle, visibility was barely 10 meters ahead, and the map they were given was already proving useless. The river they were supposed to cross had shifted course or dried up completely, and now every step forward felt like a step deeper into the unknown. Kara signaled silently. To her second-in-command, a tall, silent operator named Reeves, who nodded and moved right into the thicket, vanishing like smoke, while the rest of the unit adjusted their packs and moved in formation toward the first waypoint, which should have been a high ridge overlooking the valley. Instead, they found a sharp drop, a ravine carved out by some recent landslide, and the cliffside was too unstable to descend by rope. The plan had already started to unravel, and Kara knew what that meant. Adapt. Survive, finish the mission no matter the cost. She tapped her comm to relay the update to base, but the line hissed with interference, not even static, just a void, and her gut tightened as she checked the signal again. Then again, nothing. Birdsong stopped. All at once, that was the first real warning. Everything went silent except the subtle creak of trees and the buzz of distant insects. Then came the first crack of gunfire, not from ahead but from above to the left, sharp and controlled, and followed immediately by a scream cut short, then more shots and a blast of heat and dirt. As something exploded to the right, Kara dove behind a tree, her rifle raised, eyes scanning, but the jungle was a wall of green and motion and confusion. Her earpiece flooded with overlapping voices yelling calls for cover for position, then silence as each signal blinked out one by one. She called out to Reeves, but heard only branches breaking. Then a second explosion knocked her to the ground and pain shot through her leg as something pierced her thigh. Not deep, but enough to slow her. She scrambled up, dragging herself behind a log, and forced her breathing steady, remembering the training. Remember the cold water in buds, the weight of failure pressing down, the sound of instructors yelling at her to never stop, never quit, never hesitate, and she didn't. She crawled forward, gun ready, eyes wide, heart slamming like a drum in her chest. Smoke rose in the distance, maybe 100 meters, maybe more, but the terrain twisted direction and perspective, and nothing looked familiar anymore. She found a boot print, deep and fresh and too large to belong to her team. Then another. Then a trail through the ferns, too quiet, too clean. Someone had moved here, recently, and not with the panic of a retreating unit. They were calm, deliberate hunters, maybe, and that meant Kara was prey. She had to move now, fast and low with every breath, counting down to the next shot that might find her spine. She took anew, heading using the sun barely visible through the canopy, and started north, hoping to intersect with the evac point if the team had fallen back. Maybe they left a signal, maybe a trail, something to follow. But every step deeper into the jungle erased. The path behind her vines closed like fingers and roots, waited to trip her up. The air was thick with heat and noise, and her injured leg burned with every push forward. Then she heard it. Not a voice, not footsteps, but breathing. Not hers. Slow and measured, coming from behind her less than 5 meters away. She froze, heart-stopping fingers tightening on the grip of her rifle. She pivoted fast. Gun-up eyes locked on the green, but nothing was there, just branches and ferns and the sound of dripping water. And yet she knew she had been heard, she had been seen, she was no longer alone. Moving again, she cut left toward higher ground, hoping to get a view of the terrain from above. She climbed using roots and rocks, dragging her injured leg and biting. Down the pain, sweat poured into her eyes, stinging, blurring her vision as the jungle opened slightly, revealing a narrow ledge overlooking a dry riverbed below. There were tracks, Tire marks, boots. Something had moved through here recently, and not. Just on foot, the marks were clean, not weathered. This was no abandoned trail. It was active, and that meant someone was using this jungle and hiding something here. She dropped to one knee, checking her pack supplies, low water nearly gone first aid. Kit already opened and half used. She didn't have days, not even hours, unless she could find her team or make contact with base, and that meant power, that meant signal. But in the distance to the east, she saw a thin column of smoke rising slow. And deliberate, not like a crash, not like an accident, but like a fire built with care and control. And that meant people, and people meant danger or hope. Her choice was made. She descended the ledge, sliding half the way, catching herself with her good leg and landing hard, then moving fast. Crouched low eyes scanning the trees as the light began to fade and the jungle changed again. Sounds deeper, more alien things crawling just out of sight. Movement that didn't match wind or wildlife. Something, aware something watching her from somewhere she couldn't pinpoint. As the last light vanished and the canopy turned black, Kara set up a small shelter using branches and her emergency blanket, just enough to keep the bugs off and the rain out. But she didn't sleep. She couldn't not. With that feeling still crawling up her spine, the sense that she was being followed, not hunted exactly, but studied, like something waiting for her to get comfortable, to lower her guard, to think she had time, when really she didn't. Just before midnight, the trees creaked again, and something passed between them, not on the ground, but above her weight, shifting branches without sound. No growl, no whisper, just motion. Just presence. And in the darkness, she raised her rifle and held her breath as a shape paused in the treetops above, unmoving and watching, and somehow aware that she was watching back. Kara's eyes stayed fixed on the shadow hanging motionless above her, barely daring to breathe or even blink. Her fingers tightened around the worn grip of her rifle. But the jungle was alive with sounds, now louder, sharper, unfamiliar, and the night seemed to close in from all sides. No more safe spaces, no more moments to rest or think she had to move. But every step was agony. Pain radiating from her injured leg like fire spreading through her veins, yet the fear of being discovered pushed her forward faster than the injury would allow. She slipped silently through the undergrowth, guided by the faint light of a waning moon casting silver streaks through the thick canopy branches scraping against her face, arms bloodied and raw, but her focus never faltered. The trail was unclear, but there was something ahead, something she had to find or die. Trying the radio was useless, her comms dead and base silent, like she was completely cut off from the world. She tried. Once again, a desperate call, hoping for a crackle of static, a voice, a hint that she was not alone. But all she got was the same hollow buzz. Her breath hitched when the sound of footsteps broke the silence close by. Heavy, deliberate, measured, and not hurried like those of a hunter stalking prey. But someone searching for something, or someone she pressed herself against. A tree heart pounding, a cold sweat mixing with the heat of the jungle as she crouched low and waited. The footsteps stopped almost directly in front of her. The leaves barely rustled and the air grew still and then moved as a figure emerged briefly. From the shadows, a tall man in dark fatigue's face obscured by a mask and eyes like cold steel scanning the ground, as if looking for tracks. Kara's mind raced. She couldn't risk an open fight. Not with her wounds, not with no backup, not with this. Stranger possibly, armed with more than just a rifle, and her advantage was only in stealth and knowledge of the terrain, so she stayed still, invisible, almost breathing through her mouth and trying to blend with the jungle's rhythm when the figure suddenly dropped a small device on the ground, a flickering red light blinking like a heartbeat. And then he moved on, vanishing into the darkness, just like he had appeared. Curiosity warred with caution, and despite herself, Kara edged forward slowly to the device and picked it up, her fingers trembling as she examined the small gadget. It looked like some sort of tracker or sensor, the kind her team had used before to mark hostile movements. But this was different. The light pulsed with an irregular pattern, almost like a code or a warning. She tucked it away and shifted her gaze toward the faint sound of water flowing in the distance. The river she had hoped to find had become a lifeline, a source of hope and survival. But the closer she got, the louder and more alive the jungle became, shifting from quiet tension to an almost electric pulse, as if something else was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Kara knelt at the riverbank, eyes scanning the murky water and the shadows beyond. When suddenly a splash echoed nearby and her heart leapt in her chest, she turned fast, just in time to see a figure drop behind a tree and disappear. A trap, she thought. But why here and why now? Her mind flashed back to training. Drills about ambushes, about false trails and psychological warfare enemies who could be anywhere and nowhere. At once, she gripped her rifle tighter and crept forward, following the trail of broken twigs and crushed leaves until she came upon a small clearing, and there a sight that stole her breath away. A makeshift campfire smoldered, glowing embers faintly lighting a circle of discarded supplies, crates, water bottles, medical packs, some marked with foreign letters, and among them a small battered notebook lying open, face down on the ground. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and damp earth. And something else. Something metallic and sharp like danger waiting in the shadows. But the worst part was what Kara saw next. A blood-stained rag tied to a tree branch, fluttering like a flag of surrender or warning. She couldn't tell, and beneath it, fresh footprints leading deeper into the jungle, a trail that vanished like a secret into the night she faced. A choice. Keep moving toward the signal or retreat and wait for rescue, but she knew waiting meant death. Because out here in the wild, the jungle didn't forgive, and the enemy didn't forget. Her injured leg screamed protest, but she forced herself onward, following the footprints until the sound of voices reached her ears, low, hushed, and speaking, in a language she only partly understood, something about a prisoner and an extraction window closing fast. The tension in their voices made her stomach twist like a knife. This was no ordinary enemy patrol. This was something organized and deadly, and they were closing in. Kara ducked behind a fallen log, heart hammering, as she watched two figures approach the camp, carrying a limp body wrapped in canvas and bound tightly with ropes. Her mind raced. This was the proof she needed, not just that she was being hunted, but that her team had not made it out intact, and worse, that she was alone against something far more dangerous than she had imagined. Suddenly, a sharp crack from behind made her whip around just in time to catch a flash of movement and a blur crashing through the bushes, her rifle swinging up, but the shot went wide and the attacker vanished into the darkness like a ghost. She was bleeding more now from shallow cuts and bruises, but adrenaline flooded her veins, drowning out pain. For now she had to survive, had to find out who was hunting her, and why. With every passing moment, the jungle grew colder, darker, and the weight of isolation pressed down on her like a suffocating shroud. She wondered if help was even coming, if anyone knew she was still alive, or if this mission had already been written off a lost cause. Her fingers brushed the tracker device in her pocket, a small beacon in the darkness, but also a reminder that someone out there was watching and waiting for her next move. And then the radio crackled, suddenly breaking the silence with a burst of static and a voice, low, urgent, and unfamiliar, saying, "You are not alone." Kara. And that was when she realized that the game had changed, and the jungle was no longer just a place of survival, but a battlefield where every step could be her last. The voice on the radio was barely audible between static and interference, but it was real and it was close. Kara's heart slammed in her chest. She clutched the device tighter and scanned the shadows around her for any sign of movement. The jungle was a living thing, breathing and watching, and with every rustle of leaves, her senses sharpened to a razor edge. She moved cautiously, stepping over roots and dodging hanging vines, her injured leg burning with every motion. But the voice on the radio had sparked a fire inside her. Now there was someone else in this hellish place, and maybe they were friend, or maybe they were foe. She ducked low behind a fallen tree trunk and caught her breath, eyes darting left and right, trying to spot any hint of light or sound that would give away a position. The voice had said she was not alone, but that meant danger or salvation, and she could not afford to guess wrong. The device in her pocket pulsed softly like a heartbeat in the darkness, and with it came the nagging feeling that she was part of something much bigger than herself. Something planned and precise and waiting to unfold. Kara forced herself onward, following the faint glow of the device. She barely noticed the way the jungle seemed to close in around her as if it was swallowing her whole. The heavy scent of earth and moss filled her nostrils, and distant calls of animals echoed like ghostly warnings, but her focus was razor-sharp. She crept closer to the source of the voice and the strange red blinking light that was her only guide through the tangled green labyrinth. Suddenly, a twig snapped sharply nearby, and Kara froze. The silence shattered, and the sound of heavy footsteps thundered through the underbrush. Her breath caught in her throat as shadows flickered between trees, and a figure emerged, holding a weapon trained directly on her. The man stepped into the moonlight, revealing a face she recognized from her intel, a rogue operative known only as Striker, a ghost in the world of covert operations, ruthless and deadly, and now blocking her only way forward. Kara weighed her options, heart racing, but there was no time for hesitation. She lowered her rifle slightly and spoke in a low voice, trying to buy time. "Who sent you, Striker, and what is your mission here?" His eyes narrowed, a cold smile twisting his lips. "You should have stayed out of this, Kara. The jungle is not your battlefield anymore. It belongs to us now, and you are trespassing on dangerous ground." Before she could respond, he lunged forward fast, and without warning, throwing her off balance and into the dense brush. The fight was brutal, raw, and desperate. Both warriors, fueled by training and adrenaline, grappling for control and survival. Kara fought like a wildcat, slashing and twisting and landing a solid blow to Striker's ribs, but he countered with a vicious strike, sending her crashing to the ground, pain exploding through her shoulder. She gasped, struggling to breathe, but refused to give up her mind a whirlwind of strategies and survival instincts. She rolled to the side, grabbing a sharp broken branch and driving it into Striker's thigh, making him howl and stumble backward. Blood mixed with sweat as the fight spilled into the moonlight, and the jungle watched silently, waiting for its next victim. But Kara's advantage came not from brute force, but from knowing the terrain. She ducked under a low-hanging branch and sprinted toward a narrow ravine, using the steep cliffs to her advantage. With Striker close behind, she leapt across a small gap, barely landing on the other side, and without hesitation scrambled up the rocky slope, her injured leg burning, but her spirit unyielding. At the top, Kara paused, catching her breath and looking down into the ravine where shadows flickered and distant voices carried on the humid night air. The enemy camp was closer than she thought, and the mission that had gone wrong was now part of a larger scheme. She could feel it in her bones, but before she could plan her next move, a sudden movement to her left caught her attention, and she froze again. The trees parted, and a figure emerged wearing a hooded cloak and carrying a rifle, silent and deadly. The stranger stepped forward, raising a hand, and in a calm but firm voice, said Kara Voss, "I have been sent to help you, but time is short. We must move now." The voice was unfamiliar, but there was something in it that told her this was not a trick, not a trap, not another enemy waiting to strike. She nodded slowly, and together they vanished into the shadows, moving like ghosts between trees, leaving the ravine behind and the danger lurking below as they moved. Kara's mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Who had sent this mysterious ally, and why were they so determined to keep her alive. The jungle was full of secrets and betrayals, and every step they took deeper into the unknown brought more questions than answers. But the one thing Kara knew for certain was that surrender was not an option, and survival was just the beginning of the fight. Ahead, suddenly their path was blocked by a fallen tree too large to climb over or go around. The stranger gestured, and Kara noticed a narrow tunnel hidden beneath the roots, a dark, narrow passage, barely big enough to crawl through, but their only option. Without hesitation, they dropped into the tunnel, the walls slick with moisture and the air thick with the smell of earth and decay. Kara could hear the faint drip of water echoing in the darkness and the low hum of voices somewhere far above. But in the tunnel, everything was still except for their breathing and the slow, steady thump of her heart. They moved carefully through the tight space until the tunnel opened into a small cavern, lit by faint bioluminescent fungi casting an eerie blue glow. The stranger reached into a pouch and pulled out a small device, pressing it against the wall, and a hidden door slid open, revealing a stairway carved into the rock leading upward. Kara hesitated before following the stranger up the stairs, the unknown waiting on the other side, and the feeling that nothing in this jungle was as it seemed. At the top of the stairs, they emerged into a hidden base, carved into the mountainside, camouflaged perfectly with the jungle surrounding it. Armed guards and high-tech equipment filled the space. A stark contrast to the wildness outside, Kara realized this was the heart of the enemy operation, and that her survival had been part of a plan bigger than she could have imagined. But before she could ask questions, alarms blared, and the base erupted into chaos as enemy forces discovered their location. Kara's mysterious ally grabbed her arm, pulling her toward an escape route, a hidden elevator that descended deep underground. The walls shook as explosions rocked the base above, and the voices shouting orders grew closer and more urgent. Kara knew this was not the end, but just the beginning of a mission that would test every ounce of her strength, courage, and will to survive. And somewhere deep in the jungle, the shadows waited, ready to close in again. Door splintered, gunfire erupted, chaos swallowed the room. Darkness fell. Shots echoed, shadows closed in heart-pounding, last-breath courage. Burning Kara fought, knowing survival meant defeating the impossible enemy.